Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSat live lectures. Dear friends, today in political science we will take on further Parliament in India. In this topic we will further discuss about the composition of Parliament, the functions of Parliament and the various debates regarding Parliament in India. To discuss this topic we have with us our subject expert Dr. Satish Kumar Jha. Dr. Jha is Associate Professor in Department of Political Science in Aryabhatta College, University of Delhi. He has over 25 years of teaching experience and his area of expertise lies in political theory and in political thought. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Sir to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, Sir.
Thank you, Amrit, and good afternoon. Today, in fact, I will take up the second part of the discussion on Parliament, which I initiated in my last lecture. In fact, in the first part of this lecture, we took up several issues related to the composition of Parliament in India. But before that, I had also prefaced my entire lecture with some preliminary remarks that how Parliament has evolved in India, particularly in last 200 years due to the colonial connection, because the Britishers introduced in India a limited democracy with limited franchise and electoral process. But in fact, the major development started taking place only with the formation of the Constituent Assembly, and subsequently, as I mentioned, that 1952 India has had the first general election when the two houses of Parliament, the lower house that is Lok Sabha and the upper house that is Rajya Sabha, were constituted. In fact, there are several issues related to Indian Parliament. As I was mentioning earlier in my lecture, that India is neither considered purely a parliamentary system nor purely a federal system. Rather, it offers a very interesting combination of the features of both federal and the parliamentary forms of government. To the extent that many scholars argue that India's political system, India's polity combines the feature of American federal system and the British parliamentary system. As I was mentioning earlier also that the Commonwealth, India is not only exception. In fact, the Commonwealth countries like Australia, Canada, New Zealand and some other countries which had similar association with the British colonial power basically tried to model their constitution, their polity on a combination of both the British and the American types. So therefore, India also stand out in terms of its constitution, in terms of its broad features of its polity. The two houses of Parliament, as I was mentioning earlier in my lecture, the first part of my lecture, that the lower house, that is the popular house, is called Parliament, and the upper house, that is the Rajya Sabha, that is called the federal house. So upper house in India, that is Rajya Sabha, is a federal house, whereas the lower house, that is the Lok Sabha, is the popular house, because here the process of electing members is different from the process which we find in the upper house, that is Rajya Sabha, which is indirect and also based on the proportional representation system, as I was mentioning earlier. Whereas the system of representation which is prevalent in the lower house is first past the post system, and therefore it is not proportional the way the upper house is elected and constituted. Now, I will basically today take up 3-4 important issues. In fact, yesterday I had basically alluded to this issue of membership qualifications, that how what are the criteria on basis of which what are the qualifications required for becoming the member of the two houses of Parliament. At the same time, I also alluded to this question of disqualification, that how members are disqualified, how they can lose their membership of the two houses of Parliament. Now, two things I mentioned in my lecture, that one thing is very clear in the Constitution, that anyone can no member of Parliament can at the same time take the membership of both houses of Parliament or the one of the houses of Parliament and the state legislature. So therefore, the moment one becomes a member of more than one house, he or she has to basically resign one of the membership. But apart from that, there are several provisions through which members are also disqualified. In fact, one of the important provisions through which member is disqualified is basically anti-defection law as it exists in the 10th schedule of the Constitution after amendment in the Constitution 1985. That is 52nd Amendment. Then there are elaborate provisions in Representations of People's Act in 1951 under which a member can be disqualified. Then of course, there are certain constitutional mandates in the Constitution itself under which a member can be disqualified if he or she holds the office of profit, if he or she is found of unsound mind, becomes insolvent, not a citizen of India, acquires citizenship of any foreign country. Under these conditions, the Constitution mandates that the membership can be terminated. Of course, in the matter of disqualification, in fact, it is finally the order of the President which matters, because only President can disqualify. Because as I was mentioning earlier also, that when Indian Parliament is defined, it is defined as the two houses of Parliament and the President. So President becomes part of the Parliament because it is integral part of the entire legislature in India. Of course, while disqualifying a member, the President can also obtain the opinion of Election Commission under Article 104. So this is how the Constitution mandates about the disqualification of members of the Parliament. But apart from that, you have the Representation of People's Act 1951, where you have a number of provisions through which the membership can be terminated. Now these provisions are quite elaborate. For example, disqualification under charges of any serious offense. And particularly the section 8 of this act says that if the punishment is by fine or imprisonment, and the reasons have also been cited here. The reasons could be promoting enmity between groups, practicing untouchability or promoting it, exporting prohibited goods, membership of any unlawful organization, FERA violation, and several other provisions have been laid down there. So if someone is convicted under any of these provisions or any of the law existing at that point of time, he will be disqualified for 6 years after this imprisonment period is over. But of course, for any other offense apart from this, and if someone is convicted for 2 years, disqualification would be of similar nature. So that is something related to Representation of People's Act. But apart from that, there are other provisions through which also member can be disqualified, particularly for indulging in corrupt governmental practices, for of course indulging in corrupt electoral practices. And there are a number of instances when issues related to these things were raised. For example, recently one member of the Parliament, who also happened to be the Chief Minister of his state, was disqualified after the court found him guilty on corrupt governmental practices and was sentenced, and therefore after his conviction, or in fact he was disqualified from the membership of the House. So similarly, this is one important basis on which a member can lose his or her membership. Apart from that, this indulging in corrupt electoral practices is also a very serious offense in terms of the law related to the membership of the Parliament. For example, in a very famous case, Indira Gandhi versus Raj Narayan, 1971, when Mr. Raj Narayan, who happened to be a socialist leader, contested against Mrs. Gandhi, and after losing the election, took the matter to court and challenged it, saying that she indulged in corrupt electoral practices. And matter was finally settled in his favor. And of course, when she went to the Supreme Court in appeal, the Supreme Court accepted the appeal, but in the meanwhile, emergency was declared. So therefore, there is a classic case related to this type of matter particularly related to the question of disqualification. Apart from these things, one can also lose membership because of certain in certain conditions. For example, for prolonged absence from the proceedings of the House can also put a member membership of a position in jeopardy. In fact, for prolonged absence without any formal permission can lead to the termination of membership. Even punishment by, in fact, the House can also lead to to the termination of membership. For example, there are 2-3 classic cases related to such termination of membership. For example, in 1951, H.G. Mudgal, who was found lobbying for some industrialists, and the House basically terminated the membership of H.G. Mudgal. In 1976, Subramaniam Swamy, during emergency, was found forging the attendance register of Parliament, and therefore his membership was also terminated. In 1978, Mrs. Indira Gandhi was found guilty by the Privilege Committee of the Parliament, and her membership was terminated. Recently, in 2007, 10 members from the Lok Sabha and 1 member from the Raj Sabha, their membership got terminated when they were found in cash for question scam, and this matter became quite controversial. So therefore, this is how a membership can be terminated by the House also, by the House proceedings. Apart from that, there is a procedure, there is a provision for resignation. A member can also resign his or her position from either House of the Parliament. Of course, this resignation thing has to be found out by the Speaker or the Chairman or the Chairman, that whether the resignation is voluntary or has been done under duress, because one controversial issue emerged in 1974, particularly when Nav-Nirman movement in Gujarat was going on, and the activists of that movement forced many members of Parliament to sign a resignation letter, and that necessitated the 33rd Amendment of the Constitution in 1974, and that requires that the Speaker or the Chairman, the presiding officer of the House, has to find out whether this resignation is voluntary or has been under duress. So this is how we can have a broad idea about the membership qualification, disqualification, and termination of membership from the both houses of Parliament. The another important question related to the Parliament and its composition is the privileges of the members of the Parliament, or privileges of the Parliament, because privilege is a very important issue, because breach of privilege can lead both to the termination of membership as well as can attract punishment handed down by the either house, insofar as either those who are not members are concerned. So privileges are very important. But here one thing is important to remember, that privileges are not codified in the Constitution. And normally the Constitution mentions that all those privileges which are available to the members of, in fact, this House of Commons in Britain would be available to to the members of Indian Parliament also. But later on, 44th Amendment made some modification in it, saying that those privileges which Parliament can enact or legislate from time to time. Until that time, whatever privileges existed before 44th Amendment would be in vogue. So therefore, some modification, but broadly speaking, privileges are not codified. They have neither been codified by the judiciary. Of course, a number of cases pertaining to the privileges of the members of Parliament have reached the judiciary, particularly related to this fight between fundamental rights and the parliamentary privileges. Which one is more important, parliamentary privileges or the fundamental rights? Using fundamental rights, particularly right to expression, freedom of expression, the media has been writing about the conduct of the members within the two houses of Parliament. And at times it has come into conflict with the privileges granted to the members of the Parliament. And this matter has come up several times in last 7 decades. The classic cases relate to one searchlight case in Bihar in 1950s, when the editor was basically punished by the House of, the legislature of the state. And then finally a matter reached to the court, and it was adjudicated that fundamental rights have to submit to the privileges of the Parliament, to the legislatures. That means that the privileges granted to legislature have to supersede the rights given to individual or citizen under section 3 of the Constitution. part 3 of the constitution. So that is one thing. But the most controversial issue related to this privilege issue, privileges of members, in fact came up when this Keshav Singh case happened in UP. In fact, the speaker reprimanded and punished a member, and in fact ordered his imprisonment, and the Allahabad High Court gave reprieve to him, and the speaker and the house took it as an offense and ordered arrest of the 2 judges who had given reprieve to this journalist. And finally, Nehru as a prime minister recommended to president that under advisory jurisdiction of Supreme Court, the opinion of Supreme Court should be sought. So therefore, what we have seen that this issue of privilege has often come up from time to time, and there is no final settlement of this issue, but nonetheless it is believed that so far the privileges are concerned, they have to basically supersede the fundamental rights given to the members of the parliament. So this is something related to privileges. The next issue is of course the separation of power doctrine, because this privileges, the question of privileges has often led to controversy related to this separation doctrine, whether judiciary can interfere in the functioning of the parliament or not, whether parliamentary proceedings can come under the purview of judicial review or not. So this is very important issue. As I had mentioned in my in the earlier part of my lecture, in fact this separation of power doctrine, where United States of America is a classic case of this separation doctrine. India doesn't follow that doctrine so strictly, but nonetheless there is a kind of a spirit of separation basically latent in the constitution itself. In fact, this separation of doctrine comes in form of 2-3 important provisions in the constitution, which run across the constitution its document. That first of all, no discussion of the conduct of judges except through the motion of impeachment can happen in the parliament. And number 2, the courts cannot inquire into the proceedings of the parliament. These 2 things basically point out or point to this doctrine, that is there is a separation doctrine in the Indian constitution as well. In the recent times, what we have seen that there are a number of instances of the breach of this doctrine, particularly from the side of the judiciary, and particularly what we hear these days, the phenomenon called judicial activism. What judiciary has done, that not only arrogated to itself the role of executor, but also has started arrogating to itself the role of a legislator. And at times it is found that the judiciary not only adjudicates but also legislates. So therefore, in fact this important dimension is a kind of development which is recent in its origin, and basically it shadows, or one can say that it to some extent disturbs this entire separation of power doctrine in the India's constitution. For example, in fact what happened, that when cash for vote scam took place, the judiciary took this position that judiciary would review the conduct of the members of parliament. Similarly, when 93rd amendment was being done to the constitution, court wanted to see the proceedings of the select committee which dealt with this issue, and these issues are the exclusive prerogative of the parliament, but the court basically not only poked its nose in the exclusive domain of parliament, but tried to extend its judicial review to those issues as well. Similarly, one is also reminded of that famous Jharkhand Mukti Morcha case, when Narasimha Rao who was the prime minister, and a matter came up that some members bailed out his government and there were the charges of bribery. And the Supreme Court in that famous Jharkhand Mukti Morcha case stated that parliamentary democracy also constitutes the basic structure of the constitution, and therefore the judiciary, the Supreme Court, has an obligation to protect this basic structure, and therefore it can not only review but also can inquire and look into any issues related to the functioning of the parliamentary democracy, which is quite broad in terms of its ambit, and also quite broad in terms of its scope. So therefore, the separation of power doctrine, though not as clearly laid down here as United States of America, but nonetheless there is a spirit of that separation prevalent in the Constitution, and that spirit at times gets disturbed because of judicial overreach in recent years. So this is one important dimension. Now, after looking at these qualification, disqualification, privileges and the separation doctrine, one has to look at the working of the president, working of the parliament, that how parliament functions. Now, it is here that we have to see that the two houses of course are separate, but there is also relationship between the two houses. We will take up this issue later. Now, working of the parliament, the lower house of the parliament and the upper house of the parliament, in fact the Lok Sabha and Raj Sabha, both houses have their own presiding officers. The Raj Sabha has Vice President of India as ex officio chairman. Of course, the Raj Sabha also elects its deputy chairman. Similarly, Lok Sabha has elected a speaker and also a deputy speaker. And these presiding officers, the chairman and the speaker are basically in charge of the proceedings of the two houses of parliament. Of course, under 52nd Amendment anti-defection law, the presiding officers have been given important power in respect to anti-defection law. In fact, this issue has also reached to the judiciary several times, particularly a speaker's decision. And there are 2-3 important cases related to this speaker's decision, particularly in terms of the decision to disqualify a member. For example, in 1990, when Ravi Ray was the speaker, when he decided that this defection cannot be a continuous process but one-time issue, and later when another speaker, that was Chauhan, Shivraj Patil, he decided that defection can be continuous process. So we have seen that the speakers taking different views of this anti-defection law, and their judgments have also varied, and therefore the matter has at times reached to the Supreme Court, particularly challenging the decision of the speaker or the presiding officer so far as anti-defection law is concerned. There is another important issue related to the presiding officer, particularly the speaker of the Lok Sabha, the lower house. That is his neutrality, because there are two instances of the conduct of the presiding officer of the lower house. One is House of Commons, another is House of Representatives. United States, the speaker is not a neutral entity, whereas in United Kingdom, in fact, a speaker becomes a neutral entity, so much so that after becoming a speaker, if next time he or she decides to contest the election, no opposition party normally fields a candidate against him or her. So therefore, this neutrality is upheld in practice in United Kingdom, whereas United States of America, the speaker remains a party man or party woman, and therefore he or she is not expected to play that neutral role. In India, of course, this convention has not developed to that extent, whether the speaker is a neutral entity or is a partisan person, in the sense that party affiliation remains with him or her after becoming the speaker. In fact, in 2008, when this civil nuclear deal issue was being debated by the parliament, and then a speaker of the Lok Sabha, Somnath Chatterjee, was asked by his parent party to resign the speakership and become an ordinary member so that he could vote on that particular discussion. In fact, he refused to resign under this on this basis that after becoming the speaker, he has to uphold the neutrality of that office. So this controversy has been coming up again and again, off and on, but nonetheless, as I was mentioning, that this convention of neutrality which has developed in United Kingdom has not materialized in India to that extent. And for that matter, one has to infer that Indian presiding officer, the presiding officer of the lower house, that is the Lok Sabha, resembles more with the American House of Representatives than the House of Commons in Britain. So this is something related to the neutrality of the presiding officer, particularly the speaker. And this neutrality question is important, particularly after this anti-defection law of 1985, the 52nd Amendment, because as I mentioned earlier, that it is the speaker whose judgment is considered significant and final so far as this anti-defection provision is concerned. Of course, now this working of the Parliament starts with two, three important issues. One is the bills. In fact, the passing of the bills, that is legislation. Because as I was mentioning, I mentioned in the very first lecture, particularly the introductory part, that Parliament is essentially believed to discharge three functions. One is representational function, second is deliberative function, and third is the law-making function. So law-making function is the important function of Parliament, and that starts with the bills, the way bills are moved, the way bills are passed, the way laws are enacted, and the way the entire proceedings take place. So this legislation part is very important. Now, of course, there are three types of bills, and those bills are ordinary bills, money bills, and constitutional amendment bills. Of course, these bills have a different procedure through which they are passed in the Parliament. Thank you. In fact, this discussion of Parliament can remain incomplete without having a discussion of the most important function of Parliament, that is the legislative function. Because out of the three functions, deliberative, lawmaking, and legislative, this deliberative lawmaking, in fact, the lawmaking becomes very important, because after all, legislature is the only organ of the government which is tasked with this job to frame laws. So basically, this is the exclusive domain of legislature. Now, how laws are made? And the laws are made through Act of Parliament, that is a legislative act. And basically, those acts are initiated or they originate in form of bills. So bills are basically the pre-act stage of law. Once bills are passed by the Parliament, they become act of the Parliament, and then they basically go into the statutes and they become laws. So this is how this the bills graduate to acts and laws. Now these bills normally are three types in Indian context. They are ordinary bills, they are money bills, and they are constitutional amendment bills. Now the ordinary bills, of course, is also having two types. One is the government bills and another is the private members' bills. Government bills are the bills moved by the treasury benches, the ruling party, the Council of Ministers. And since a ministry, the Council of Ministers enjoys the confidence of the House, that means the majority of members support the bills. But the private members bill is a bill which can be moved by any private member irrespective of party affiliation. And normally every Friday a time is earmarked for private members bill. But if you look at the history of Indian Parliament, we find that seldom this private members bill has sailed through because it has not been able to muster the support which is required for getting passed. So therefore, private members bill, there is a provision, but till now there is no instance where private members bill has turned itself into an act or a law. So therefore, this is something related to the ordinary bills. But one thing we should remember, that under Article 108 there is also provision for joint session of the Parliament in case there is a deadlock between the two houses of Parliament. Because the law making act of the Indian Parliament mandates that in order to become law, a bill has to be passed by both houses of Parliament, that is Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. But if there is a kind of difference of opinion between the two houses, and the President can ask for a joint session, and this matter or this deadlock to be resolved under 108. When the two houses of Parliament meets, of course, it is a different matter that the Lok Sabha, that is the lower house, has an edge over the Rajya Sabha because of its size, because the Lok Sabha is bigger than the Rajya Sabha. Rajya Sabha has only 250 members. But when members start acting as per their party affiliation, then the size of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha becomes immaterial, because then the party whip will be more effective in getting the obedience of its member. So therefore, this logic of joint session of the Parliament, in fact, one cannot say that whether Lok Sabha has an edge or the Rajya Sabha will finally have its way. So this is how these ordinary bills are dealt with. Then after ordinary bills, there is also provision of money bills. Money bills are basically the financial bills. And one thing is important, that money bills can be introduced only with the consent of the President, and it can only be moved in the Lok Sabha, because in financial matters it is the popular house, not only in India but world over, which has always been given a more significant role compared to the upper house in a bicameral system, which is a federal house. So basically, in financial matter the lower house has more power, in federal matter the upper house has more power. Now similar thing prevails in India. The money bills, of course, can be moved with the consent of the President, and it can be moved only in the Lok Sabha. In fact, the Speaker has to certify whether it is a money bill or not. Of course, Rajya Sabha, as I mentioned, doesn't have much power on the money bill. In fact, it can only delay it for 14 days. Beyond that, the Rajya Sabha doesn't have any jurisdiction on the money bill. So far as the third type of bill, apart from this ordinary and money bills, is the constitutional amendment bill under Article 368 of the Constitution. And here the both houses have concurrent power. Both houses play important role. And one thing is to be remembered, that unlike the ordinary bills, in this constitutional amendment bill, there is no provision for breaking this deadlock through joint session, as I mentioned, can happen in case of the ordinary bills. So constitutional amendment bill under Article 368, can both, basically stipulates that both houses have concurrent power, and in case of difference of opinion or deadlock, there cannot be a joint session. Now this kind of procedure through which bills are passed and they become act. Of course, one thing is to be remembered, that a bill does not die due to the prorogation of a house. House can be prorogued, but still basically the bill will live through that prorogation. Of course, even the dissolution of the house, if the bill is pending in Rajya Sabha, it cannot die a natural death. So therefore, this is how a bill is basically a bill becomes an act and law. Now for passing the bill, there is a provision, and this is called reading. And in Indian Parliament, there are three readings of a bill before it becomes an act. Of course, after it is introduced, that is the first reading. Then there is some discussion. Then of course, the matter can be referred to a select committee, which is an ad hoc committee, can be constituted for this purpose. And after the select committee is constituted, the bill is referred to that committee, and then people's input is taken, and then again select committee makes its recommendation, and then again it comes back to the House, and then there is again debate and discussion, and then there is a second and third reading. So this is how after 3 readings it is put to vote. And normally these ordinary bills are passed by the majority of the members, whereas the constitutional amendment bill, there is a different procedure under 368 for passing a constitutional amendment bill. In fact, in some cases it has to be the majority of the members of the House, that is 50 plus 1, plus 2/3 of the members present and voting on that particular moment can see it through. But in certain other provisions, there is additional requirement that more than 50% of the states have also to ratify, particularly those issues which pertain to the federal polity, particularly which relate to center-state relations, the powers of the President, power of the Supreme Court and High Court, so on and so forth. So essentially related to the federal issues can be amended in the Constitution only after more than 50% members basically ratify it. Now after this bills, the next issue is the committees, that how Parliament conducts itself, how Parliament functions, because Parliament, one can say, there has 2 committees. Rather in fact there are 3 different types of committees. One is the standing committee, second is the ad hoc committee, third is the department related standing committee, which is a new development since 1993. In fact, one can even say that the cabinet is also a council of ministers is a committee of the Parliament, because it, after all, Parliament creates it for its own functioning, executing its decisions. So therefore, council of ministers is also a kind of committee, but when we talk of committees, we essentially mean by committees these 3 different types of committees: standing committees, ad hoc committees, and the department related standing committees, which is recent in development. Now first of all, let us start with the standing committees. Now standing committees are also 2 types. One is the financial committees and other is the non-financial committees. Financial committees are very important standing committee of Parliament, and the most important financial standing committee is the Public Accounts Committee. Now this Public Accounts Committee is there in India since 1954. In fact, this committee is essentially meant to scrutinize all the accounts of the government. In fact, it is basically tasked with the job to check the appropriation, wrongful appropriation. In fact, one can say that it keeps vigil on the purse of the government, on the people's money. So therefore, this Public Accounts Committee is a very important committee. Now Public Accounts Committee has 22 members. In fact, these 22 members are divided between the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, 15 members coming from Lok Sabha and 7 members coming from Rajya Sabha. Chairman, a convention has developed in India that the post of chairman should go to opposition party, particularly the largest opposition party. Of course, the election, there is also provision for election through a single transferable vote system. In fact, Comptroller and Auditor General, which is a constitutional body, in fact is supposed to assist this committee in discharge of its function. The second important committee that is called Committee on Estimate, and this committee is essentially a committee of House of People, that is the Lok Sabha. In fact, this Committee of Estimate examines the appropriation proposal of the government, and the 30 members which normally are there in this committee all come from the Lok Sabha, and basically ministers are barred from this committee like any other committee. And the third important financial committee is the Committee on Public Undertakings, Now, this committee of committee on public undertakings, because of the proliferation of public sectors during 60s, 50s and 60s, this committee was required, and this committee on public undertakings therefore came into existence in 1964. In fact, this is also a committee where the members from the both houses of parliament come and join. The 15 members of this committee is divided in a ratio of 10:5, 10 coming from the Lok Sabha and 5 coming from the Rajya Sabha. Now, apart from these three financial standing committees, there are certain non-financial committees, and these non-financial committees are basically the committees which deal with the day-to-day functioning of the house. For example, you have committees like house committees, like Business Advisory Committee, Committee on Absence of Members, Enquiry Committee, Committee on Petition and Privileges, Committee on Government Assurance, Committee on Subordinate Legislation, Committee on Welfare of the Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes. So, therefore, these committees are the house committees which are basically there to look after different issues. In fact, the service committees of the house is essentially meant to render help to the members through library committees, through joint committees on salary, allowances, and so on and so forth. So, this is how this house committees function, in fact, to help the members, to help the house in discharge of its function. The third type of committee, which is a new innovation since 1993, it is called Ministry Based Specialized Standing Committee. It came into existence in 1993. In fact, the first beginning, of course, as a kind of preliminary experiment started in 1989 with agriculture, science, technology, forest and environment having such committees. But formally it was inaugurated in 1993, when the Rules Committee in its third report in 1993 made suggestions which ultimately led to the formation of this new ministry-based specialized standing committee. Now, there are many committees now. 1993, the 31st March 1993, it was formally inaugurated. Rule 331C was established for the conduct of the committees in the House, and the provision of these committees are also elaborate. For example, the term of the members of these committees for 1 year. Of course, the size is of 45 members, 30 from the Lok Sabha and 5 and 15 from the Rajya Sabha. So, one can say it is a joint committee of the two houses of parliament. The members are nominated by the two presiding officers, the speaker and the chairman. In fact, the chairmanship of this these committees, of course, is decided by the speaker, and the chairmanship can also go to the opposition parties. Now, in these committees, what we find that the party strength in the parliament is mirrored to the great extent in the composition of these committees. The membership in these committees is distributed to various parties as per their strength in the two houses of parliament. Now, one thing is to be remembered when we discuss about the committee system in India. India committee system is still not as mature and developed as United States of America. In fact, there is no separate provision in the constitution dealing with the committee system. Whatever provision is there is that flows from Article 108, which is basically which talks of privileges of the members, and the committee system in India has been derived from it. Now, Maurice Jones, in his celebrated work on Parliament in India, opined that Nehru initially dissolved all colonial committees, but later on, as and when it was required, the committee system started evolving in India. In fact, committees, to that extent, one can say, is the instrument of parliament. It is not an instrument of government, and therefore at times we find that ministers are kept out of the purview of these committees. Of course, ministers can be asked to come before the committees, but normally ministers are not the functionaries of these committees. The role of the committee, of course, is advisory, and basically it renders help to the parliament in the conduct of its proceedings, because parliament, normally the two houses are big bodies. They cannot discharge their duties as effectively, particularly due to the size and the paucity of time. And through these standing committees, what is sought to be done is a smooth functioning of Parliament, a more effective oversight on the government, on the finances, and therefore the committee is a very important instrument in in particularly the discharge of the legislative duties of the Parliament. Of course, Subhas Kashyap, who has done a lot of work on these the committees and the procedures related to the Indian Parliament. In fact, he believes that these department related committees which came into existence in 1993 were essentially meant to keep a sharp surveillance on the government, but how effective that has not properly been researched till now. But of course, one thing one can say that since its inception, particularly 1993, the department related standing committees has been doing a good job in terms of keeping the government, particularly different departments, different ministries on their toes through questioning, to debate, and through kind of oversight. So therefore, this committee system is becoming more vibrant in India with the new committees coming and old committees also getting a new role with more vigilant media, more vigilant press and citizenry in India. So therefore, the members of Parliament in these committees have to discharge their duty more effectively. Now, after this committee system of the Parliament, because we are discussing that how Parliament works, the two houses of Parliament, the working of the two houses, and we have seen that how it works through presiding officers, how it works through committees, how bills are passed, how bills are moved, so on and so forth. Now, that takes me to some other issues related to the Parliament in India, and this relates to the three different types of relationship. The first relationship is between the two houses of Parliament, the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. The second relationship pertains to the relationship between the Parliament and the judiciary, and the third relationship is related to the Parliament and the executive. To begin with this relationship between the two houses of Parliament, Lok Sabha, that is the lower house, and the Rajya Sabha, that is the upper house. The Lok Sabha, as I mentioned earlier also, is a popular chamber because the method of electing the members is through direct election, first past the post system. And the Rajya Sabha is called a federal chamber, and therefore it is basically meant to protect the interest of the units in a federation, that is states, and their rights. And therefore the members are elected through the elected legislatures of the various states. Of course, this federal nature of Rajya Sabha, as yesterday I was discussing, is different from the Senate in United States of America because of asymmetrical nature of its composition. Some states have less representation than the other states. For example, Goa, Mizoram, Nagaland and other states have only one member in the Rajya Sabha, whereas in UP has 36 members. So therefore, this asymmetrical nature of its representation is often referred as a kind of deviation from the classic case of the federal chamber, so far the Rajya Sabha is concerned. Even this provision for nomination, the 12 members are nominated, as I mentioned earlier, that militates against the spirit of this democratic spirit and the federal spirit of the upper house, because nomination is anathema for a democratic chamber. In fact, it happens in United Kingdom in case of the House of Lords, the upper house, but then United Kingdom is not a federal polity, it is a unitary polity. So therefore, coming to this relationship between the two houses, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, as I mentioned earlier also, that in financial matters, because the Lok Sabha is a popular chamber, therefore it has more power compared to the Rajya Sabha. In fact, money bills originate only in Lok Sabha. Money bills is certified by the presiding officer of Lok Sabha, that is the Speaker. Rajya Sabha doesn't have much power except the delaying power for 14 days. In financial matters, if the Lok Sabha has an edge over Rajya Sabha, in federal matters, it is the Rajya Sabha which has an edge over Lok Sabha. And therefore, two important things to be remembered here. The two important provisions, the federal provisions. For example, Article 249, if it is decided that the center can legislate on any issue which comes under the state list in the center-state relationship, the division of power in 7th schedule. It is the Rajya Sabha which is given this right to basically pass a bill, pass a law that the center will legislate on this matter which comes under the purview of the state legislation under the 7th schedule division of power. So, this is one important issue. This is a federal issue, and therefore, Rajya Sabha has been given a power, exclusive power on this matter. Similarly, creation of all India services is also the exclusive prerogative of the Rajya Sabha. Here not Lok Sabha, but Rajya Sabha can decide that how this all India services can be created. There are many all India services. They are basically, they discharge their duties in various states, but they are appointed by the center, by the president, and therefore, if there is a requirement for a new all India services, it is the Rajya Sabha which has to take a call on this. So, this is very clear that in federal matter the Rajya Sabha has more power, in financial matter Lok Sabha has more power. Of course, in amendment related matter both houses have concurrent power, because as I mentioned that if there is a deadlock, if there is no agreement between the two houses, there is no provision for joint session, and therefore, a constitutional amendment bill will die a natural death. So, therefore, in ordinary bills of course, the deadlock can be broken through the joint session, but not in the constitutional amendment bill. In financial bills of course, the Rajya Sabha does not have much to say. So, this is how the two houses of parliament, the relationship between the two houses of parliament has been mandated in the constitution. The second important relationship between parliament and the judiciary, and this relationship is important in India, particularly after the advent of this judicial activism or what is called judicial overreach. Because as I mentioned earlier that India does not have a separation of power doctrine in the constitution like United States of America, but nonetheless there is a spirit of that separation running all through the constitution, and it is argued by scholars that this spirit at times gets disturbed due to the judicial overreach in recent years when judiciary tries to interfere in the functioning of the parliament. Now, this relationship is clearly laid down in the constitution, that the conduct of judges cannot be discussed in parliament except through the motion of impeachment, and it is also mentioned that the conduct of parliament cannot be reviewed by the judiciary. But in recent years, as I mentioned earlier, we have seen that judiciary has basically shown its inclination to review the conduct of the parliament, the two houses of parliament, particularly 93rd amendment was the best example. Otherwise also in name of judicial review, by declaring parliamentary democracy as the basic structure of the constitution, Supreme Court has given ample indication that it is not averse to this idea of reviewing the functioning of the parliament. So, therefore, this relationship is becoming more controversial day by day. In fact, it started much early with many landmark amendments and landmark judgments by the Supreme Court. The two judgments are historic, Golaknath and Keshwanand Bharti case. And similarly, number of amendments during those periods, 24th, 25th, 42nd later, because particularly in 70s and early 70s and late 60s and early 70s, this controversy was at its peak. But one thing one should remember, that this relationship is largely conditioned by the strength of various parties in the parliament. If we look at the 7 decades of the history of Indian parliament, it has witnessed 3 different types of combination on configuration, party-wise configuration. One party dominant system of earlier era replaced by the phenomenon of minority government, particularly of VP Singh and Narasimha Rao, and then you have had the phenomenon of coalition government. Now, one party dominant system, the relationship between judiciary and the legislature was of different type. But in era of minority government and coalition governments, in fact, this relationship acquires a different dimension when judiciary basically increases its overreach, when it tries to use this weak ruling party position in the parliament to its advantage, when it knows that there is a fractured mandate and the parliament, no party has absolute majority. So, therefore, this party-wise configuration, the party political process also impact this relationship between the judiciary and the legislature. Of course, in recent years judicial activism is there, lot of criticisms are also made, but at the same time it is also argued that since legislature and executive have abdicated their role, at judiciary has arrogated to itself this right to basically act both as a legislator and as executor. Now, the third important relationship is the parliament and the executive, and this relationship, like judiciary and legislature, has also been conditioned by the party position in the parliament. Now, one party dominant system, particularly Nehru, later Indira and the Rajiv period, when India witnessed one party dominant system, the parliament and the executive relationship was conditioned by it, because one party was controlling the parliament, and therefore there was not much of an issue. But later on, when the minority government and coalition era started, when many regional parties started playing important role, this relationship has also undergone changes. Now, of course, one thing is to remember that this relationship is also vitiated when you have reduced sessions of parliaments and weakening of the control of parliament on the executive, because parliament is essentially meant to render control on the executive. But if you have less number of sessions, if there are disruptions, if there are unruly behavior of the members of the parliament, then parliament cannot discharge its deliberative role, and therefore this relationship also gets vitiated, and parliament basically fails in discharging its duty in controlling the executive. And finally, the challenges before Indian parliament, there are a number of challenges. Of course, the debate has started on decline of parliament, that parliament has declined. A lot of people are saying that in terms of representation, new classes, new groups, new identities have entered the parliament, and therefore it has succeeded in integrating the nation. On the other hand, in the rule making, in legislative, in deliberative terms, one argues that there is a qualitative decline in the parliamentary functioning over the years. Of course, a lot of scholars have started arguing that in India there is a ruralization and regionalization of polity. Lot of new interest groups, lot of new identities have entered, and therefore the nature of parliament is changing, and that is basically in tune with the changing nature of Indian democracy. But with proliferation of regulatory bodies, with globalization and liberalization, and parliament losing its oversight on those regulatory bodies is also one issue which is often raised by the scholars, that now parliament has to find out a way to keep an oversight on these regulatory bodies, particularly responsible for regulating the market. Now, international treaties are not within the purview of the parliament, but after WTO, World Trade Organization, and similar other treaties, it is also argued that such treaties have to be brought under the purview of parliamentary supervision and deliberation. So therefore, we can see the number of challenges. Some of the suggestions for reforms were made by a National Commission for Review of Working of the Constitution, Venkat Committee, and many other suggestions have been coming both from scholars, academia, the civil society. But one thing is very clear, that Indian Parliament in last 7 decades has shown its vibrancy and as a political institution which is basically integrating this nation much more than any other political institution could have done.
On that note, I would like to thank sir for this very enriching discussion, and thank you dear friends for watching our show. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.